Morning, everybody. Happy hump day and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's political correspondent, Sophie Huskisson, who's feeling a bit under the weather, but has managed to make it here anyway. Morning, Sophie.
Good morning, Susie. Thanks for having me.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to wait until someone removes the party whip. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the gurning appearance of disgraced royal Prince Andrew at a family memorial ceremony yesterday, where, in the absence of the Prince of Wales, he got to be front and centre, leading them into the pews. More on that inside the paper. But this morning, I want to talk about a couple of stories that are driving the news agenda in a different way. And the first is the appearance yesterday before a Common Select Committee of Alan Bates, the postmaster who organised resistance from all those who were wrongly accused of fraud in the Post Office Horizon scandal, and whose role was immortalised in the ITV drama Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. Now, Sophie, can you take us through this a bit? What did he say when he was up at the Select Committee?
So we all saw the awful ITV drama Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, which has kind of ignited
drama, Sophie.
Yeah.
Not the awful drama. The drama about something awful, but was a very good drama.
Yes, it was a very good drama. But highlighting the awful true story of the Post Office Horizon IT scandal, in which hundreds of postmasters were wrongly accused of stealing money from their post offices, where actually it was this Fujitsu Horizon system that had bugs and defects. And yes, compensation for the victims of the scandal is still ongoing. There have been delays and delays and delays. As we had Alan Bates, the lead campaigner in Parliament yesterday, along with some bosses from the Post Office, the chief executive who's in place now, and also the former chairman of the Post Office. And Alan Bates was just, he wasn't praising of the Post Office nor the government in the compensation scheme. He basically was just saying that we need to get on with it. We need to get on with this compensation scheme. There's been a lot of distractions. He's been leading this campaign for like some 20 years, two decades. And he basically said, the Post Office, it may as well be sold off to Amazon for £1. It's a dead duck. Sort of good riddance to the Post Office, because for everything that's been done, there needs to be some sort of fundamental change where it's taken and it goes into different hands, it's sold off, just so actually we can get this compensation in people's pockets. People have died without compensation. This is he was really just urging, get on with it and get it sorted.
Yeah, so it was quite sort of an astonishing appearance, really, in a lot of ways. Now, select committees, for those who don't know, this is sort of the part of the House of Commons or the Lords as well, but in the Commons, they're sort of the committees that look regularly at the work of a particular department, and a lot of their staff's quite boring and they don't get a lot of attention, but they do like, therefore, to call in someone who is in the news at the moment or is a celebrity who's got a view about something, because sprinkles a bit of stardust on otherwise dull proceedings, gets journalists like us to actually go along and actually sort of pay some attention to what's going on. So it sounds like Mr. Bates was pretty dramatic for them, selling the Post Office to Amazon and so on, paying up now, all the rest of it. But they also called a chap called Henry Staunton, who's pictured on the left there. For those who are watching, you can see, who used to be the former head of the Post Office and who hit the headlines last week, I think it was, when he said that he was ordered to slow down the compensation until after the next election. Now, the government has quibbled about that. The civil servant he accused of saying it says, no, I didn't. He's produced a note of the conversation at the time where it looks like maybe it did. What did he say exactly?
Yeah, so this is Henry Staunton, former Post Office chairman, and he was dismissed by Kenny Badenoch, the business secretary. And then he did this sort of explosive article interview with the Sunday Times, in which he made the allegations that you just referred to about him saying that he was ordered to slow down compensation payments, essentially so the government could limp into the next general election. There was this huge row, and Kenny Badenoch hit out on Twitter about this. She basically said that these claims were false. And yesterday, Henry Staunton, we didn't know if he was going to roll back at all, if actually, he's put too much out there. But no, he doubled down on his claims. He said that he had been part of a smear campaign, that, his name had been tarnished. And he it's part of what Kemi Badenoch hit back has said was that she had dismissed him because there was also an investigation into his behaviour that was ongoing. He provided some further evidence of this, and he basically said that these allegations were not to do with him as such, but they were part of a report that was to do with Nick Reed, who's the current chief executive of.
That's it. He was accused of bullying, wasn't he? And that's what Kemi Badenoch said at the dispatch box. And then he said yesterday that actually there was an 80-page report about his successor in which the allegations about him were one single paragraph within that 80-page report. So,
which he denies as well. It's that he made a politically incorrect comment that was included in the report. He denies this. Obviously, the investigation is ongoing. But yeah, he was very defensive in his stance yesterday against the government and the post office.
It seems astonishing, doesn't it, that what we've got is the situation where, for anyone who saw that drama, innocent human beings being sucked into a scandal and accusations of wrongdoing as a result of a faulty computer system, which they had no way of unpicking or defending themselves from. They were demonstrably and admittedly harassed, prosecuted, persecuted by an arm of the British state, part of the government, and where some were jailed, wrongly convicted, pressured into signing false confessions. And then we all know, and it is just a proven fact, that the vast majority of them were innocent. The Prime Minister has said he will exonerate them all with a bit of legislation. But yet here we are with Kemi Badenoch, Henry Staunton, and others, and it would appear perhaps parts of the civil service and internally the select committee as well to some extent, and they're all playing politics with it. So you've got this situation where you have human beings who are sucked into something awful that needs to be pulled out of it, but yet it seems to be something where the current government thinks that this is something they can use to punish someone with, or it's something they're doing wrong, so someone's punishing them with it, and they're playing politics all the time, and it's like a game. And I can't see any way that anyone comes out of this looking any better, really. I kind of share Alan Bates's frustration here. It's appalling, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not looking too good at the moment. And they also haven't been looking good for a really long time. And I think we saw the power of what a drama can do with getting the public behind the campaigners in this. Because as mentioned before, this has been going on for decades. And we saw the huge petition that came out for Paula Venables, who's overseeing the post office during the time that that postmasters were going through this, calling for her to have her CBE stripped, and she's now handed that back. We've seen the kind of pressure that the public can put on. But obviously this is, authorities have known about this for a really long time now, the post office and the government. And why haven't they acted during that time? This is a huge scandal, and you just think, well, they should be acting. It shouldn't take the public or an ITV drama to get change here. And as we're seeing, even with that, it's still being very slow. Lawyers were saying yesterday that it could be taken up to 2 years for people to still be getting their compensation. These are people's lives that we're talking about. And, they've been hoping for this to be over for so long. And, you saw that in the drama. This is 10 years of my life, 20 years of my life. We don't need that to go up anymore.
No, it's just astonishing. Mike says the MPs have found themselves £31 million for their own security protection, quite rightly, within days. If Badenoch wanted this settled, she could do it immediately. The kind of money that has been suggested for the postmasters has already been ring-fenced to the Treasury. It's not like spending it is going to cost anybody anything really at this point, because it's already been put in the piggy bank. It just needs to be opened. The fact is that having that £1 billion in the Treasury piggy bank means you can offset it against other things, right? And it's much better at a budget if you've got an extra billion that you're setting off against something else, all right? It makes a difference to the sums that you're doing. I mean, what do you think, everybody? Do you think this is something where perhaps politics is playing too much of a role? Do you think it's something where politics has to absolutely play a role, because that's when the public react to something and the politicians are supposed to react to the public's view and make a change? What would you want to see happen with the postmasters? I mean, Sophie, we did have a promise from the Prime Minister that he was going to pass legislation to exonerate everyone who is convicted. Where are we on that?
So we had an update earlier this week in the Commons on that, which essentially was that legislation will be introduced as soon as possible next month, with the hope that it can be passed through and pushed through by July. There are delays often, parliamentary procedures, legislation has to come under scrutiny. We're hoping that everything will get pushed through by July as promised. But yeah, we will have to see, and we will all be watching with a keen eye on that.
And it also means, of course, not having a general election called in the meantime, which would dissolve Parliament and stop everything in its tracks.
Indeed.
So we'll have to sort of see how things pan out there. I suspect we won't get as far enough along the road as we should do before Rishi has to do that. Now, to the main sort of story, really, which is sort of growing in harumpitude this week as we go. I mean, it's happened sort of end of last week, and it's just sort of bubbling along now, really, which was the appearance of Liz Truss, who, in case you blinked, was the Prime Minister for about 6 weeks in 2022. At a fringe Republican convention in America. Now, this is called CPAC. It's where the edges of the Republican Party sort of meet and talk about things that usually don't affect the mainstream politics too much. But with Trumpism, these kind of fringe events have taken on much more relevance, because now you're talking to people who are influencing the possible president. Now, we've got some footage of her speaking, and see if you can spot the bit where she's talking about herself.
Of course, we need a Republican back in the White House. We need it desperately. And by the way, it's not just America that needs it desperately. We need it desperately right across the free world, because you are the leaders of the free world, like it or not. And of course, we need Republicans in the Senate, and we need Republicans in the House of Representatives. But we need Republicans who are prepared to fight. We need Republicans who aren't going to cave in to the establishment. We need Republicans who are prepared to take on this difficult task, even if it's unpopular, even if they're criticized, even if they don't get invited to any dinner parties.
Oh, even if she doesn't get invited to any more dinner parties. Now, that was just one of her sort of speeches at the event, but she was also doing lots of interviews and TV spots, things with GB News and Nigel Farage, and podcasts and things like that. So what else was she saying, perhaps when she wasn't sort of on the main stage, Sophie?
Well, yeah, we've been getting all these little sort of golden nuggets of Liz Truss's trip to DC, to the Conservative Political Action Conference. So yeah, various things that we've had. So a radio show that she was on has been a particular focus for controversy and discussion. She was sitting alongside Steve Bannon, who's a former strategist for Donald Trump. And he basically praised Tommy Robinson, the founder of the English Defence League, and called him a hero. And she didn't say a thing. She didn't challenge him or say anything at all.
And I'm pretty certain there was also some suggestion about he was a convicted football hooligan, wasn't he? There was some, arrested for assault several times. I think there was some suggestion of drugs at some point or another, and also that some of his funding wasn't necessarily going to the things that it should have been going to. But she didn't, when he was a hero, having provoked an awful lot of strife on the streets at home, perhaps that Steve Bannon might be forgiven for not knowing about Liz Truss as a politician who's in ministerial jobs for the past, 2 decades, 15 years, absolutely knows who Tommy Robinson is, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, his real name. And she said, what again?
Nothing.
She said nothing when he was called a hero. Right. Anything else? What else did she do?
Yeah, so other parts is she obviously, we know what happened with Liz Truss, and you obviously mentioned she wasn't in office for a very long time at all. And if we go back to then, that was from her and Kwasi Kwarteng, her chancellor at the time's mini budget, which crashed the economy. She tried to make a load of unfunded tax cuts, which, as we know, the nation are still feeling now with their mortgage rates going off as they're coming off their fixed mortgages. And she basically said, oh, look, people weren't ready for it. She said the deep state sabotaged her plans and her efforts to make these tax cuts. There have been accusations of her, therefore, spreading conspiracy theories about this. And then Mikey Smith, he's one of our political deputy editors, and he was in DC, and he got a scoop as well that she went to this other meeting with a bunch of key right-wing figures. We've got a few. One was the director of a think tank that has close ties to the far right prime minister in Hungary. There's another one who's the CPAC chairman, and he's currently facing sexual assault allegations, which he denies. But she was at this meeting with all of these people. They're bouncing ideas off each other. And there have been several parts of this, especially the stuff around tax cuts and conspiracy theories around the deep state, alongside Tommy Roberts' stuff, that has led to calls for her to be investigated by Rishi Sunak. Labour and the Lib Dems are piling on pressure there, saying, he at least needs to look into this because, she's still a Tory MP, I think we remember.
Exactly.
Still part of the Conservative Party.
Yeah. Now, what do you think, everybody? That CPAC is a place where, if you have a look on Twitter, you can see there's footage of people throwing Nazi salutes, all right, and laughing. And this is not like the Conservative Party convention in Brighton. Okay, it's a bit different. Now, in case you've forgotten, Liz Truss is also the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk. She has 65,000 constituents she's supposed to be acting for, none of whom give a good goddamn about the Republican Party in America. And that's not going to help in Norfolk at all, under any circumstances. She's got the Tory whip, and she's supposed to toe the party line on not just in votes in the House of Commons, where she's been remarkably absent of late, but also in public prognostications on things like the economy, immigration policy, that sort of thing, which she was very much talking about. In fact, she was saying, one of the things I think she was saying was that the reason her government was brought down was sort of a combination of the deep state, the elites, of which presumably someone who'd been minister for 15 years might well be a member of, and immigrants and drag queens, as far as I could tell. These were all working together, right? Fundamentalist Islamic terrorists, Islamists, were working alongside drag queens, in some kind of big conspiracy with the men in suits to bring down Liz Truss's brilliant, great idea of tax cuts, which absolutely nobody really thought was a good idea at all. But she can argue with it, of course. I mean, she's not in government. She can argue with the party line. She's not bound by collective responsibility. But she is supposed to still be a Tory with constituents to act on behalf of. She has casework to do. She has people who need her to represent them. And she's got a party leader who she is, at least in theory at the moment, in charge. So how is Rishi Sunak or the people of South West Norfolk, I suppose, how are they reacting to all this? Are they just fine? Or have they got a problem with it, Sophie?
Well, that's something we're yet to see with Rishi Sunak, especially. I mean, I can't imagine her constituents will be too impressed, or that she's particularly present in the constituency. Perhaps there's a great army out there doing her emails for her to constituents. But with Rishi Sunak, we've seen he's been busy with a separate row over the weekend when we saw the suspension of Lee Anderson when he claimed that Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, was controlled by Islamists. For a while, we weren't sure if he was actually going to suspend Lee Anderson for that comment. And, he did. There, he said the line was crossed. But time and time again, we see with different instances where that line it seems to have been crossed, but then no action is actually taken. And it's quite hard to sometimes read the Conservative Party rulebook and find out where that line actually is, because it seems to be able to chop and change in different instances. I mean, we'll be interested to hear what more Rishi Sunak has got to actually say on this, or whether he will take any firm action against Liz Truss. Not only, yes, she's still a Tory MP, but it is important that our former prime ministers reflect the country well. She has immense influence and power, having got to sit in the top chair in number 10. And it's very important that maybe they have a few conversations together, but has to take that forward.
Yes, I can't think of any other sort of former prime ministers that are doing this kind of thing. Mike says, with Liz Truss, Kemi Badenoch, Lee Anderson and Paul Scully, another Tory MP, all espousing what many would consider some far-right views, does this signal a breakaway in the post-election Tory party or an attempt to drag it in their direction? There does seem to be some kind of, talking, I suppose, on the right wing of the Conservative Party, kind of about the direction they want to be in a year's time. They seem to be thinking beyond the next election, which they're expecting to lose, and what the party will look like and how they can remold it to in their eyes, be more successful, but in everybody else's just be more lunatic. And what you're saying about Rishi and the line that it doesn't seem to, that moves, that people cross and then don't cross and all the rest of it. How can he really tackle Truss? Because she was elected by the membership and he wasn't. He was imposed upon us and them. And she is therefore more popular than him. If he was to act against her and some of these other people, as we've seen with Lee Anderson's suspension, he's had some criticism for doing that as well. Everyone is kind of expecting him to not be around in 6 months' time. So whatever he does is kind of pointless. And is it going to actually have any impact? Because if he suspends someone and they just go, whatever, and carry on, then his authority's lost and he has to go to the country sooner, doesn't he? He's a bit stuck.
Yeah, he is stuck in between a bit of a rock and a hard place on this. And, he takes action and he looks weak. He doesn't take action and he looks weak. I mean, the fear that he has is that, as you were saying, you've got some of these really kind of loud, passionate right-wing figures, very hard line on particular issues, including immigration, and they are trying to move the party more and more to the right. And for him, he's worried about annoying them. If you start to get on the wrong side of some people who, lots of their constituents and lots of people in the Conservative membership or Conservative voters might feel passionate about some of the issues that they're talking on, for instance, immigration or Rwanda projects, etc., then you risk perhaps pushing them further to the right and voting for parties like Reform instead. We've seen in recent by-elections that Labour has managed to win not because the Tories have lost so many votes, but because of a combination of Tories losing votes and also people voting Reform. And, that means that Labour are then winning with the most and a bigger majority. So I think that's a definite fear for Rishi Sunak, that he can lose those people on the right to Nigel Farage's Reform Party.
You can't really kind of exert discipline over someone if trying to do that actually removes all your authority, because it makes it clear that you don't have any. It becomes really difficult. Connie says, hopefully the direction of the Tories is down and out. The thing is, Connie, I mean, what do you think, everybody else? If the Tories do go down and out and they lose the next election and lose big as they're expected to, they've got to have a renaissance of the party, a rebirth, which is what Labour had after 2019 to some extent. And whatever is born out of that is something that we all have to live with later in opposition, if not in government. So do we want it to have the kind of punishment which is going to make it more populist and more far right? Do we want it to be reborn as a more centrist party, more of a one nation Tory party, which is the kind of thing that most of us would have grown up with to some extent? What comes out of a real beating is sometimes not very nice. I don't want to I don't want to invoke Godwin's law, but have a look at what happened after the First World War in Germany. It's just not good, right? You don't need to give someone a complete trouncing sometimes. So it seems to me a bit kind of, I mean, Keith Wright says Liz Truss should concentrate more on her own mental stability, which is clearly questionable. Thank you, Keith. I'm coming on to this because without wanting to psychoanalyze Liz Truss too much, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it seems that to me that her premiership was so disastrously bad. I mean, 3 weeks of it, she couldn't do anything because the Queen had died. And then 1 week of it, she was busy waiting for someone else to take over. So she only really had 2 weeks as Prime Minister, and they were all bad. I mean, she was humiliated by a lettuce, let's remember, which is not nice. Ever since, she seems to have been in a quest to have people kind of confirm her belief that she was right. That ever-decreasing circle of logical impossibility, therefore, has just drawn her at last to CPAC, where only the most lunatic people in a fairly lunatic country, most of whom had no real idea who she was, are prepared to clap and applaud this stuff. And well, at home, those of us, who've all got bigger mortgage payments or inflation, tend to sort of just laugh sarcastically in her general direction. So she's gone there for reassurance and for ego stroking and to convince her that she's not mad and that there are people who agree with her. Now, but it doesn't seem like, as Keith was saying, she's not really on the road to self-awareness, it would appear. And she's going to carry on this route to what's being some sort of, political David Icke, where she thinks she's saying what everyone wants to hear and no one's listening anymore. But the simple fact is, I suppose, Sophie, as mad as she might be these days, she was elected by the Tory membership. Rishi wasn't. He can't really pull the leadership baseball bat out to shut her up without either engaging in some of her madness and talking about those things and saying how bad her premiership was. For example, he can't have a go at Liz Truss, really, without saying, well, we shouldn't have had those tax cuts. Yeah. And that's so anti-Tory, isn't it, to say we shouldn't have tax cuts. And he can't, or B, alienate those Tory voters who would otherwise go to reform and the Tory members who still perhaps think those tax cuts were the right thing to do and who still think Liz is their person and did vote for her and didn't get a chance to vote for him. I mean, where do you see her going, I suppose, is the question.
Well, I mean, that is the $1 million question, because you would think that after what happened with crashing the economy, you may take a little step back, have a little think and a reflect. But since then, we've seen her help to establish the Growth Commission, a think tank on her ideas, then Popular Conservatives, another organisation, thinking about those sort of right-wing ideas on tax cuts that were in her mini budget. Now she's over in DC. It seems that she's on this quest, as you say, and it's endless, going on and on and on. I mean, yes, you say she wasn't elected by the membership, but with what happened with the mini budget, she gave Rishi Sunak a favour in a sense that actually he can be like, we need to be, economically responsible. We need to be, we need to be good. We need to have fiscal responsibility and slow down in our decisions and not take any leaps. If there's no tax cuts in the upcoming budget on March 6th, he will be able to say, I'm not going to take a risk as what happened before. So, I think many people, as you say, who have lived through that chaos and have got high mortgage rates now will appreciate stability over anything.
Yeah, and it's just astonishing, really. I suppose we have to sort of, if we could sit there with some popcorn and watch Liz Truss and see what's going to happen to her next, I think turquoise shell suits could well be on the horizon. But she's just going to keep coming back. It would seem like a bad smell. But like I say, I can't imagine any other former prime minister of any party or of any level of popularity. For example, I mean, Theresa May goes and gives speeches to places, but she doesn't go and freelance quite like this. Some of this stuff was, foreign policy stuff. And it's a long way away from the MPs and the constituents and the voters who she should be acting for. And it seems to me it's easily worse than Nadine Dorries going in the jungle and abandoning her voters. And that she lost the whip for that. So Liz Truss should probably lose the whip for this, but whether she would care or not, who knows? Now, thank you for that, Sophie. If you have any other questions about Liz Truss and where she's going next, do let us know. But in the meantime, we have managed to find some good news for you. Here it is. Now, there was some consternation in the West Midlands last summer when a local landmark called the Cricket House pub, which was all wonky because of mining subsidence, it was very old though, was subjected first to an arson attack and then to unapproved demolition. Now, the site was due to have some houses built around it. This pub had shut down because no one was going there anymore. But it was, some people thought perhaps that the pub was in the way of that housing development. Now, 6 people are on bail over the arson, but a planning enforcement notice has in the meantime been served on the owners, demanding they rebuild this pub brick for brick with all the wonky bits included. So they've got to build it back as wonky as it was. Sophie, is this proof, do you think, that knocking down something unbeloved is the best possible way to convince people that they actually did rather like it and they should have preserved it and been down there and buy a pint a bit earlier?
Yeah, it's the classic, isn't it? You love something, especially after it's gone. That's when you want it back the most. It's like when you give away your hand-me-down clothes and you just know you're going to want it back as soon as you give it away, even though you haven't used it for years. But yeah, I think it's a very special pub. It's very well known. And I think you would miss seeing that on your street corner, wouldn't you?
Yes, exactly. So hopefully they do get to rebuild it. I suspect there may be some appeals about that planning enforcement notice, because it must be quite difficult to rebuild something that you didn't, for example, ever go and drink in. But whether or not anyone's actually properly surveyed it to get it absolutely right and perfect again, and whether you could actually, because if there's loads of mining subsidence in that area, it wouldn't meet modern building standards and building regs, where you'd have to start putting concrete in underneath it to shore it all up. It's kind of, I don't know how they'd rebuild it, but I'm sure it'd be very expensive. Although, of course, it would be a massive tourist destination if they did. Again, if it was in the middle of a housing estate, fine. You get regular customers. That might be a good idea. And it'd be nice. It's just nice to see that someone in authority has decided to go, do you know what? There was something that was quite cool. Let's try and keep that. Let's try and do that again, rather than someone in authority going, let's just play politics and reassure our own egos about stuff. So that's good. Well done to the planning enforcement officers in Dudley. Thank you for that, lads. Right. Thank you, Sophie, for taking us through all this. Thank you for assisting with your lurgy. And thank you, everyone, for taking part. We will see you all again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, stay safe over the weekend, and we'll see you on the other side. Tatty bye, everybody.